4, 3.
Good evening. Welcome. I'm glad you're all here tonight. I'd like to welcome all of you here and those of you online and those of you on TV. Tonight, we're going to be talking about controlling your cholesterol naturally. But before we get into our topic, let's have a prayer to ask God's blessing on our presentation tonight. Dear God, we thank you for your many blessings, and we ask especially for your Spirit to be with us as we study how wonderfully our body is made. Give us clarity and understanding that we can cooperate with you in healing the diseases that affect us. It's our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Most everybody today knows that a high cholesterol is really bad for you. High cholesterol correlates with heart disease. But let me ask you this question. Do you know why you know that? Why do you know that cholesterol is so bad for you? It has to do with marketing. The blood cholesterol medicines, the statin drugs, and of course the number one of those is Lipitor, are the most profitable drugs in pharmaceutical history. Lipitor itself is number one. There is no medication that's ever been made before or since then that has made as much profit for the pharmaceutical industry as Lipitor. And all of the other statin drugs, these cholesterol controlling drugs, are in that same category here. Very profitable drugs, and the reason is that they're putting everybody on these drugs. And they can easily afford to put billions into marketing. And you don't always see it as marketing, as for advertisements like, Crestor and why you should take it or whatever. Much of it is put out as education with no mention of the particular drug or whatever. They're just educating you that you've got a high cholesterol level, it's really bad for you, you've got to control that cholesterol level, you need to be on a medication for that. And they know if you go to your doctor and your cholesterol level's high, what's the doctor going to do? Yeah, he's going to give you a prescription for one of the statin drugs to try to control your cholesterol level. And so we are treating these cholesterol levels with these cholesterol drugs, trying to get these cholesterol levels down. Well, one of the problems with this particular approach, the typical pharmaceutical approach, will use a drug to treat a symptom. Before we talked about cause versus symptoms. A high cholesterol level is a symptom of the fact that there are things in our diet that are not right. And high cholesterol level is itself a symptom, and we're treating that symptom, monitoring the levels, and taking these drugs to suppress these levels. Problem is, like every drug, there are side effects, and there are problems. And some of them can be quite serious. To understand one of the key problems with these statin drugs, we need to understand how your body makes cholesterol. And your body does make cholesterol. Most of it's made in your liver. And in your liver, you have these cholesterol factories. They're like enzymes in an assembly line here. And we take a molecule into the first machine in the assembly line, and this enzyme does one chemical change, one bond, change one's molecular bond. And then it passes that on to the next machine, and it changes a different bond. And to the next machine, and it adds a molecule here. And it keeps going down this assembly line, and finally when you get to the end of the assembly line, it's done all of the molecular changes necessary to produce cholesterol. Just like a factory here. You go down the assembly line and you end up with cholesterol on this end. So how do the statin drugs work? Well, the statin drugs all work on the very first tool in the assembly line. They go into that first tool, they bind onto it, and it locks it up, jams it, so it can't work. So what happens to the assembly line if you jam up the first tool in the assembly line? Well, then you've got nothing to pass on the next step, and so you've shut down the entire assembly line by jamming up the first machine. That first enzyme is blocked, and that's what the statin drugs do. They block that up, and so this particular factory can no longer make cholesterol, and that's how they lower your cholesterol level. Well, the problem comes about halfway down this assembly line as it's making this molecule and changing into this one and changing this. About halfway down, the molecule that is made that is going to be passed on down is a molecule that is also used outside of the assembly line. In other words, you use the first half of the assembly line to here. Some of it is used to make cholesterol, and some of it you use just as it is. It's ubiquinol, or CoQ10. Have you heard of CoQ10? Yeah, we realize that that's a very essential vitamin, a substance, a molecule that we need, is CoQ10. And probably the most important place we need CoQ10 is energy production. We talked last time about the mitochondria, the furnace in the cell where we put glucose in, rip all those high energy bonds out and get the energy out. Eventually we add oxygen in there and we end up releasing the carbon dioxide and we end up with water. We've used up the oxygen. This last step that holds the oxygen, that combines it with this so we can complete this furnace, this burning of the glucose to get the energy out, needs CoQ10. And so there's like an assembly line here, or I guess in this case it's a disassembly line. So we're disassembling glucose one step at a time with all of these different machines. And the very last machine in this assembly line to finish the process needs CoQ10. And if it doesn't have CoQ10, then it can't work and do its step. So now what happens to the rest of the assembly line? If the last machine isn't working, then whatever the one before was making starts building up, and then it jams up, and then pretty soon, and you start backing up product here because you can't keep pushing it through. You need it to go through all steps so that you can keep running, because pretty soon it starts backing up these, and so it's not running as efficiently. And so we've really cut down energy production in the cell by depleting the CoQ10. So if we jam up the cholesterol factory, we've also jammed up the CoQ10 factory. So what's going to happen to the body's CoQ10 levels? They're going to get lower and lower, just like the cholesterol levels are getting lower. And if we're getting low on CoQ10, what happens to the energy production in cells? And which cells would you notice it most in? The cells that burn the most energy, right? And which cells in your body are actually burn the most energy? It's actually the muscle cells. Yeah, you burn a huge amount of energy with movement. And of course, if you exercise, you're moving even more. And we can start getting, some people start noticing aches and pains in their muscles. It gets very sore, certain muscles. Again, there's not enough energy production, so there's getting sore in there because they can't do what it's supposed to do. It doesn't have quite enough energy. In severe cases, we can actually start, the muscle cell doesn't even have enough energy to maintain its integrity, and the muscle cell actually starts breaking down. It's a process we call rhabdomyolysis. And in this case, what's happening is we are actually breaking apart the muscle cells. Some of the material spills out, can jam up the kidneys. You can go into kidney failure and actually even end up on dialysis because of that with the rhabdomyolysis. So definitely some real problems associated there. Another one has to do with these statin drugs, has to do with the fact that we use cholesterol for a lot of things in the body. It's very important. And one of the places we use it is in cell membranes. Cell membranes, there's these phospholipid layer right here that makes up the membrane. Remember, we drove the cell wall on our last lecture there. There's inside the cell and outside is maintained by this. But the properties of that membrane are very important, and some of them need cholesterol embedded in the center of that cell wall to work properly. particularly neurons, the ones that carry electrical impulses over the surface of the cell membrane. They need cholesterol in that layer to function properly. And when we start shutting down cholesterol production in those neurons that they were making and sticking in their cell membrane, and there's not enough out here, we can actually shut down, so the membrane is not working as well. An individual that I know closely had a problem, and they told her that she needed to go on a cholesterol drug. They put her on Lipitor, and they put her on a low dose. They put her on 10 milligrams. Now, any of you that take Lipitor, what's a normal dose? Like 40 milligrams. Of course, some people are saying, oh no, we need more control. They're putting people on 80, but even 40 is considered. But they only had put her on 10 milligrams. But it started affecting the membranes. Of course, we didn't know that's what was going on. But after a few weeks, she started noticing the problems with coordination, perception, and it started getting worse. The hand-eye stuff and the cognition felt a little bit slow and sluggish. And it's like she's driving the car and you're on the on-ramp trying to turn. It's like you're watching the road and seeing you need to turn, but you can't quite get the hands to keep up with it so you can turn and stay on the road. By 4 weeks, it was bad enough she had to stop driving. She just could not do the coordination to safely drive a car. And it was about that time that she was something, and we realized something was going on there, and I researched and I found out about this particular side effect of the statin drugs. And I said, well, that's exactly what's going on here. We stopped the statin drug, and gradually over the next 4 weeks, the coordination and the handling came back to normal, and then she was able to drive a car normally there. So these drugs are not without their problems. And what I'd like to do tonight is share with you how to control your cholesterol naturally without the drugs. We don't actually have to use drugs to control it. God designed our bodies to run properly, and we can keep them running properly without putting a lot of strange chemicals in them in most cases, and this is certainly one of them. So let's take a look here. We're going to draw a picture of the body's digestive tract, because this is where the key to controlling cholesterol comes, is in the digestive tract. So let's first go through the anatomy of the digestive tract here. So where does the digestive tract start? Yeah, with the mouth. So I'm going to draw a mouth here. Does that look like a nose, a chin there? Does that look like a mouth? You go back through the mouth here, and then we got a tube that goes down to the stomach. What do we call that? The esophagus. And then after the esophagus, we end up in the stomach. So we're going to draw a stomach here. And then after the stomach, where does it go? Goes to the small intestines here. Now we're not actually drawing them all in here. We have 22 feet of small intestines here. So we'll let that represent. Actually, if we take a look at this little guy right here, you can see here, he's got all 22 feet of them just coiled up around, and they're turning around. This is where we absorb all the nutrition, the carbohydrates, the fats, the vitamins, minerals, all this different absorption takes place there in the small intestine. And then after the small intestine, we come to the colon. And there we go. It's a colon. I'm going to draw the colon here. Now, this is more of a diagram, a functional diagram, than an anatomic picture, because a colon isn't over here beside it. But we're drawing it here so we can separate everything and see what they look like. And the colon finally comes down to the rectum, where the food passes out of the body after it's been processed here. So there we've got the digestive tract, but that isn't all. The digestive system has several other organs as well. And let's see here. First, let's put a little bit of color here. Okay. Oh, fleshy color there. And down through there. By the way, we don't really absorb nutrition from our colon. The colon is more of a processing storage. We absorb the water out, but all of the absorption is taking place in the small intestine there. Okay, now, a very important of our digestive system is the liver. Now we're going to draw it up here. Obviously, this isn't where it's located in the body in comparison to everything else there, but let's change that there. Add a little color to the liver there so we can see it. And label that there so we don't forget that that's the liver. Now, one thing that the liver makes that's really important for digestion is bile. Do you know what the liver makes bile out of? Cholesterol. All of your bile salts are made out of cholesterol. And so the liver becomes the major cholesterol factory in your body. Now, we use cholesterol for a lot of things. We make certain hormones, estrogen, testosterone, cortisol, aldosterone. All of these are made out of cholesterol and are very important in the body. And of course, we talked about how it was used in cell membranes. But 98% of the cholesterol in your body is used to make bile. That is the major. If in terms of how much cholesterol, almost all of it is going into making bile. You make a whole bunch of bile every day. Now, the bile comes down the bile ducts here, and there's a little sac that stores bile for us. What do we call that? The gallbladder, yeah. And then past there, we go to the common bile duct, and it comes down, goes behind the stomach, and eventually attaches onto the first part of the small intestine here. Right there. Now let's go back here. We'll color that a little bit green here. Bile's kind of a greenish color. It's more blue than green, but we'll let that be for now. And at this little opening is where the bile can then come out and go into the small intestine here. Now, what does bile do for digestion? We call it an emulsifier. And you need it to digest fat. Everything in the body is a water-based system, okay? And that includes your digestion. All of your digestive enzymes are water-based enzymes. Everything is kind of a water-based system here. Now, what happens if you take a jar and fill it half full of water and half full of oil? They separate, they don't mix, right? What happens if you took that jar and shook it up really, really hard? They still separate, right? They don't mix. You need an emulsifier to mix them. And a good example of emulsifier is soap. Now, say you just fried up some food and you had a really greasy pan full of lots of oil and grease. And you go to the sink and you turn on the water. Does the grease come out? What do you need? Soap. And you sit there and you wash it with soap, and what happens? The grease then dissolves into the water and washes off, and you end up with a clean pan, and it all goes down the drain. So we use soap as an emulsifier to get the grease to dissolve in the water. Well, in the same way, all of the oil and fat in your food, and I'm talking about good fat as well as bad fat, any kind of fat, to digest it, we need bile. And so we make this bile, store it in the gallbladder, and use that on a daily basis. Let's remember that's the gallbladder there. Okay, now we talked about all the important things that the body uses cholesterol for, and it's one of the reasons that God designed your liver to make all of the cholesterol that your body needs. Your liver can make it, And, you know, like I said, it puts 98%, almost all of it here into the intestines. But as it goes through the intestines, when you get to the very end of the small intestine here, the last part, there's actually a cholesterol recycling center here. And all along the lining here, there is receptor molecules that take cholesterol, absorb it out, and put it into the bloodstream here. So let's just put some arrows here showing we're taking cholesterol out of the intestines and putting them into the bloodstream here. So we make most all of it into bile. The bile goes through, we've emulsified, now we're done with it, and we can recycle and reabsorb that into the system here. Now, where do we find cholesterol in nature besides inside of us? Well, every other animal needs cholesterol. Cows need cholesterol, sheep need cholesterol, fish need cholesterol. All the different animals all need cholesterol. What about plants? None of the plants need cholesterol, and none of the plants make cholesterol. There is no cholesterol in any plant food. There's not even coconut or avocados. They have fat in it, but they don't have cholesterol. The only place you're going to find cholesterol is in other animals that are making the cholesterol that they need. So here's the problem. Your body has already made all the cholesterol it needs, but now you eat the cow. Now you've got your cholesterol plus the cow's cholesterol. And then you eat the chicken, now you've got the chicken's cholesterol. You eat some eggs, and now you've got the egg's cholesterol. And you see on an animal-based diet here, we now have our cholesterol plus everybody else's cholesterol. Do you see how that could be a problem? Yeah, because all that cholesterol is coming in and going to be then absorbed when we get down here to the terminal ileum and get rid of it. So I'm going to give you 3 principles for reversing and controlling the cholesterol. And here's principle number 1. Let's put it right up here at the beginning. Put number 1 right here. Principle number 1 is don't eat everybody else's cholesterol. So we'll just draw a big arrow there at the mouth. Don't eat everybody else's cholesterol. You've already made all that you need. So we don't eat the cow, we don't eat the chicken, we don't eat the fish, we don't eat all the rest of this cholesterol because we don't need it. We already make all that we need. Okay, principle number 2 has to do with the stomach here. Now, you can be on a plant-based diet but have a lot of extra free fat. We talked about corn oil last time and how you get all of this extra concentrated fat. Well, let's just say we had a whole bunch of fried food here. Some French fries maybe. We fried them all up in vegetable oil. How much cholesterol is in vegetable oil? None. Yeah, no plants make cholesterol. So we've got this high fat meal right here, but now with all of that extra fat, how much bile are we going to need? We're going to need a lot of bile. And the interesting thing is, your stomach knows that. It senses how much fat right there, and it says, wow, we're going to need a lot of bile liver. You're going to need to really get going. And the stomach can actually send a message up here to the liver. And what does it say to the liver? It says, make more cholesterol. Because what do we make bile out of? Cholesterol. Make more cholesterol. And so your liver starts building extra cholesterol factories. You had what you needed, but now you're building all of these extra ones to make extra cholesterol so you can emulsify all of this extra fat to get the energy out of it. And so you make all of this extra cholesterol here, and of course it gets made into the bile. You dump all of this extra bile with all of its cholesterol in here, and it goes through the intestines. What happens when it gets to the very end of the small intestines? It gets absorbed into the bloodstream. Now what's happening to your blood cholesterol level? So you can be on a vegetarian diet, zero cholesterol in your diet, but if you've got a lot of fat in your diet, what's happening to your cholesterol level? It's going up, 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 because all of this extra fat is building cholesterol factories in the stomach. So there we've got principle number 2. We'll just put it right there in the stomach, and that is, don't build extra cholesterol factories with a high-fat diet. So number 1 was don't eat everybody else's cholesterol. Number 2 is don't build all these cholesterol factories with a high-fat diet. Okay, number 3. When you're on a whole plant food diet, there is something that's going to be in every single plant food called fiber. Fiber is not something you actually absorb into your body. It stays in the intestines. And let's put some here. Yeah, let's put this color here. Okay, so fiber, it's not digestible. It's these big long strands of carbohydrate. There's hundreds of different kinds of fiber. There is what we call soluble and insoluble fiber, and it's actually some of the soluble fiber that's even more important. I mean, if you think of a ripe, juicy apricot that's so liquid it just kind of melts in your mouth, very high in soluble fiber. So fiber, not all fiber is tough and chewy like bran. That's insoluble fiber. But every single fruit and vegetable is full of different kinds of fiber. It's undigestible carbohydrate things that are put together with a different kind of bond. We don't digest them. But what they do, when they combine with water and digest, they just turn into a big spongy mass. And that spongy mass fills up the intestines here and the stomach as it's passing through. And where is all of the nutrients in the food? Well, they're all mixed up in this spongy mass of fiber. Where's all the digestive enzymes? They're all mixed up in this spongy fiber mass. And as we churn and mash and move this along, this is where digestion takes place. And good digestion needs this nice mass of fiber to work in. So we'll show it here just passing through the intestines here. Now, where is all the bile? Remember, we made it in the liver, stored it in the gallbladder, and now we're dumping it out into the intestines here. And it also gets mixed up into this fiber mesh. And bile actually kind of sticks to the fiber. It sort of gets soaked up into the sponge and gets stuck on this sponge as it's going through there. It's emulsifying while it's doing all of this. But as it's going through, the interesting thing is, as we get here to the terminal ileum here, we're passing past the recycling center. Where is all the cholesterol now as we go past the recycling center? It's all stuck to fiber. Okay, so it's all bound up and stuck with the fiber. So how much is getting absorbed back into the bloodstream? Very little, almost none. So as the fiber moves on out into the colon, where's all the cholesterol? It's in the colon now. We're not absorbing it from there. And as it moves through the colon, eventually it's going to move right on out of the body. And we're going to flush it down the toilet. So do you see what we just did there? We took a whole bunch of cholesterol, absorbed it into this fiber sponge, and moved it out of the body. Principle number 3. We'll put a big 3 right here. Help us remember that one. Principle number 3 is soak up your cholesterol with a high fiber sponge to get it out of the body. Okay? So there you've got 3 principles right there for naturally controlling cholesterol. Now, when you go to the doctor and talk about cholesterol, and they talk about fats and triglycerides and all these things. They do a blood test called a lipid profile. I'm sure you've all had one done. And they measure stuff like LDL, VLDL, HDL. Sometimes they try to simplify and call it good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. And you don't want too much of the bad cholesterol, and we want our good cholesterol levels higher. Well, I'm going to show you a way to understand that. Would you like to understand what those numbers are? Well, we're going to show you here a very simple way to understand what's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, what this LDL, VLDL, HDL is. And so we're going to start here by drawing an artery, because the problem we're worried about is arteriosclerosis, these cholesterol plaques that are building up in the artery wall. So we're going to draw an artery, and I'm going to draw a cross section. An artery is like a big hose. We cut it on cross section, it looks like a circle here. So this here is a cross section of an artery, and there's a layer of muscle, and then there's an inner layer, an endothelial layer here. Matter of fact, let's just, we'll color this. Muscle layer around here, and then there's the endothelium, and of course the blood flows right through the middle of that. Now, when your intestines are absorbing fat, they can't just take the fat and dump it straight in the bloodstream. Why is that? Well, it would cause some serious problems. Because remember, blood is water-based. What happens with fat? Would fat mix with blood? No, it would separate out and form little globules of fat. And of course, little globules of fat, as they move through the bloodstream, when it got to narrow spots, would plug it up. We call that fat embolism. A very serious problem we see in the emergency room is someone who has had trauma to the major bones that are full of bone marrow. There's a lot of fat in that bone marrow. So a fellow once, he got a bulldozer, between a bulldozer and a brick wall, and the guy pushed the lever the wrong way, and it crushed his legs right here. Just smashed the femurs right there. And a lot of the fat from the bone marrow got mixed with the blood, and there was fat moving through the bloodstream. And as it goes through the right side of the heart and then goes out into the lungs, the vessels are smaller, smaller, smaller till you get to the little capillaries, and they were all plugging up with fat emboli. And very soon he couldn't breathe, and there's nothing you can do for that. And he died. There was nothing we could do to reverse that. So God knows about fat emboli, and he knows that we can't just have fat loose in the bloodstream. And so he made a way to package it up and transport it through the bloodstream, because we do need fat in the body. Every cell wall is made out of fat. All of the little organelles inside of the cell, all of their membranes, the endoplasmic reticulum, the nuclear membrane, the mitochondria, all of those membranes are made out of fat. So every cell needs fat, so we have to have a way to get fat from the intestines to every cell in the body that needs it. And so God actually designed these, I call them little trucks, little packages that transport it through the bloodstream here. So let's take a look at some of those here. So we need to get fat from the intestines. Oops, let's see here. Okay. There we go. So we need to get fat from the intestines through the bloodstream here to every cell in the body. And so God built these little trucks here. So let's just draw one here. And this one is named LDL. It stands for low density lipoprotein. Now, it doesn't actually look like a truck. It's a little ball. And the outside of the ball is protein shell, and then inside this protein shell is where all the fat is. So the fat is not loose in the blood. It's completely separated by this little protein ball right here that we're calling our truck, the LDL. low density lipoprotein. Lipo means fat, protein, and so you've got protein and fat, and that's how it's got its name. Low density means that the density is low. In other words, when you mix up oil and water, which one floats? The oil. Yeah, the oil is a lower density, and so because of all the fat in there, they're low density. And so these little balls full of fat, and they've got special proteins on the surface right here, travel through the bloodstream, and when they get to the cell that needs them, there's actually a little loading dock, and the little ball attaches on it. It's taken inside the cell, and it releases the fat in the cell, where it can then be used to build whatever they need to build out of fat in that particular cell. Now, there is another one found in the bloodstream that's called VLDL. That stands for very low density lipoprotein. So if it's very low density, it would have lots of fat in it. And indeed it is. It's not a little ball, it's a bigger ball. And so we're going to draw one of these as a big truck here. And this is the VLDL, the very low density lipoproteins. Now we often refer to these particular trucks as the bad cholesterol. Well, why are they bad? I mean, they're actually doing what God designed them to do. What's bad about them? Well, what's bad is that in the typical American diet, where does our fat come from? Animal fat and vegetable fat. It's all been taken out, used in cooking, used in frying. There's all of this, and it's all been exposed to oxygen. And when you expose it to oxygen, you get oxidative damage. And these oxidized fats, where they get oxidated, they have what they call a free radical. And it's a very reactive, damaging substance. And you get one of these oxidized fats into a cell, and it damages the cell membrane, and it starts a chain reaction that damages other molecules in that membrane and causes serious damage in there. And when you take a fat that oxidizes, and let's say we take and put that fat in a frying pan, now we have really caused a serious problem here. Because every 10 degrees you double the reactivity rate. And so by the time you raise it enough 10-degree increments to get it up to the temperature that you fry food at, you've increased this oxidative reaction by over 1 million times. And so fried food is particularly high in damaged oxidized fat. And as we digest it, as it goes through there, we absorb it into the body, we package it in the LDLs and the VLDLs, and they're transporting this bad stuff through the arteries to the rest of the body here. So let's just, I'm going to put a bunch of little red dots in there so you know the problem with these LDLs and VLDLs. It's not how they're made or where they're going, it's what they're transporting. They're transporting all of the oxidized fat found in the typical American diet. And of course, as we're transporting that, we can get into some really serious problems here. And as we go through, now God put a lot of protective mechanisms, and right inside this endothelial layer here in that artery wall are special protective cells that are designed to protect your body against things that aren't supposed to be there, things that are going to hurt you. And it knows that oxidized fat is bad. And there's special warrior cells there whose job is to try to capture that and get rid of it. They're called macrophages, the big eater cells. And these macrophages there start attacking and destroying that. The problem is there's not just a few molecules to destroy. Our diet is full of those. Almost every meal is full of those. And these cells, they keep gobbling this up, trying to destroy this bad fat that's carried around, and they eventually end up just overwhelmed. Under a microscope, they turn into what we call foam cells. They're just these huge, giant, foamy balls because they've just taken in so much fat. And more come in to try to carry on the battle. But it's a losing battle because we are taking in more oxidized fat than our body can handle. And so we start building up, I call it battlefield debris. This war is going on, but right here under this endothelium where they're doing their work, we start building up a layer of this oxidized cholesterol and fat here. That's all damaged here. And this is the beginning of arteriosclerosis, these cholesterol plaques that build up in the artery's wall. It's your body is trying to protect you from this very bad fat that's being hauled through there. And of course, with time, this layer gets thicker and thicker. Sometimes we build up huge chunks of it in certain places, big deposits start forming. The battle's going really bad there. A lot of people are coming in trying to clean it up, and the macrophages. And we end up with these huge, big plaques there. I'll draw the endothelium down here. Now you see we've restricted, the artery isn't as big. We can't get as much through the pipe anymore because all of this cholesterol plaque is building up. If this is one of your coronary arteries, if it gets narrow enough, you start getting angina, pain with some type of movement there. Any exercise can't get quite enough blood to the heart, and so it keeps going on there. But the real problem happens if this endothelium on here starts getting a little cracks or breaks in it here. And if we start cracking or breaking up the surface of the endothelium and expose some of that material underneath the endothelium, then a very serious problem can take place here, and that is the platelets and your blood clotting mechanism recognizes that break and says, oh dear, we've got a hole in the artery, we've got to patch this hole. And the platelets come up and they start sticking to it here. And so the platelets start sticking to that cracked area there, and they start building up a little platelet plug there, trying to patch what they perceive as a hole or a cut in the artery there. And they start releasing substances, and we start triggering the clotting mechanism. By the way, this platelet plug, that's why doctors frequently put you on aspirin. You know, if you come in with acute heart attack, one of the first things the doctor will give you is aspirin, or the paramedics will give you on the way into the hospital, because aspirin paralyzes these platelets so they can't go sticky and start making this platelet plug. But eventually this platelet plug is going to start the rest of the clotting chain, and fibrinogen starts turning into fibrin, and we start building a big mesh, a network of these fibers here. And of course, blood cells start getting caught in this mesh, and we form a blood clot now, or a thrombus. And you start forming this blood clot or thrombus in an artery right there, we very quickly can go to an artery that was big enough to get by okay to one that's completely blocked. And if this is an artery in your heart, that is a heart attack. That's why heart attacks are sudden, because you went from normal to blood clot very quickly. The clotting mechanism got triggered, it made the clot, you've got the thrombus, it's blocked, and now you go to severe chest pain because you've got no oxygen to that piece of the heart right there. And of course, if that's one of the big arteries in your heart, it shuts down enough of the heart muscle that you can't pump enough blood to stay alive. The first symptom of this in many people, the most common version is, sudden death. Hopefully none of us will experience that, but that's what happens right there. If it's a smaller vessel, we have one of those heart attacks that we can survive, but maybe we'll end up with congestive heart failure and weakness after that. And of course, if you're on a statin drug that's weakening your muscles, what's a very important muscle in the center of your chest? So now we not only have not enough muscle there, but what's there is weakened by the statin drug. And did you know that there has been a 600% increase in congestive heart failure in this country since we've started giving everybody on statin drugs? Congestive heart failure is where the heart is just not strong enough to pump enough blood, so fluid backs up, we get fluid in the lungs, short of breath, we get swelling in the legs, we can't sleep laying down. And the statin drugs are contributing to that there. Okay, so how do we reverse that? How do we turn that around? Well, on our whole plant food eaten whole diet, where is the fat in the diet? Maybe avocados or nuts or seeds. Where is the fat in a peanut? Well, it's not loose fat. Where is it? If you looked at it under a microscope, there's made up of little cells. And those cells, if you looked at them under a microscope, have little teeny sacs in them, and the fat is in those little sacs inside these cells that make up the peanut. Now, when you chew up a peanut in your mouth, even if you chew it up really good, if you looked at it under a microscope, you still got cells and clumps of cells there. We haven't actually pressed out. So where is that peanut oil oxidized? No, it's never been exposed to the air. Nothing bad has happened to it. It's clean, safe oil the way God designed it to be. And we swallow that. It gets down to the stomach, then it gets into the stomach acids and juices, and now the proteolytic enzymes and the concentrated acids tear apart those cells down to the thing, and we start releasing free fat into the stomach. But where's the oxygen? See, we have taken it, by the way God designed and packaged it, all the way down there. By the way, when God packages it, He not only packages it to keep it away from oxygen, but He puts in it vitamin E and some other very important antioxidants. In other words, if a molecule of oxygen did get in there, the first thing it would hit after being that would be a vitamin E molecule, and that sucks it up. It's like a fire extinguisher to put it out so it can't continue to react. That's why they often talk about antioxidants and how important they are, because they stop this oxidative reaction, these bad things. So even if a little bit got in there, there's enough vitamin antioxidants to stop that reaction. And so in that case now, so if the only fat in your diet came from eating walnuts and almonds and avocados and olives, how much damaged oxidized fat was in your food that day? None. So what's inside the LDL and the VLDLs now? Good fat. Fat that can be used by your body. Fat that's not going to carry on this warfare over here. And you know what? Not only have we stopped the war, but all those macrophages there, they can start cleaning up that battlefield debris. And what do they do with it? Well, they want to get rid of it, and they put it in little trucks. So we're going to draw another one of those little trucks here. And these are a little bit smaller, just the way that happens to be. And so they're a higher density, and so we call them HDLs. Okay. So there's an HDL, a high density lipoprotein. And what's in it? Well, it's all of this bad fat that is being taken out of the cholesterol plaques here. So I'm going to draw a little arrow, and guess where it's taking it? Anybody know where they take them? Yep. They go to the liver. Yeah, the liver has little loading docks for HDLs. So these HDLs, they pick up all of this. Matter of fact, let's mark them here so we can know for sure what's in there. So I'm going to put so it's all full of bad stuff here. Bad stuff that it's taking out of your cholesterol plaque, and it's being taken to the liver. Okay? So, by the way, that's why we call that the good cholesterol. Not because it's good per se, but because of its destination. We're getting it out of the body. We're taking it out of the cholesterol plaque. That's why it's good, because of where it's going. And it's taking it over to the liver. And what's the liver going to do with all this bad cholesterol? It's going to dump it into the bile. Yeah, that's where 98% of the cholesterol goes in there. It's going to dump all of it into the bile. And where's the bile going to go? It's going to go out here, and it's going to get, and we're on this whole plant food diet. How much fiber is in our diet now? Yeah, it's full of fiber. And so it gets all stuck in the fiber. So now we've got all of this bad cholesterol to the liver. Now it's in the bile, and now it's stuck on all of this fiber. And as it goes past the recycling center, it's stuck on the fiber. And then what happens? It goes through the colon, and we flush it out of the body. Do you see what we just did? We took cholesterol out of your artery wall, put it on the HDL, took it to the liver, bile, onto the fiber, and got it out of your body. Would you like to get cholesterol out of your arteries? This is how to do it. And indeed, we have shown that. In many cases, we have taken people and put them on this program. They've had an angiogram. You can see how narrow the arteries. When those arteries get narrow, the doctors usually want to put a stent in there or do a bypass surgery. But we can open up the arteries. We can get that stuff out of there and just open it up by the proper diet. We can move that all out. And, you know, bad blockages, it'll probably take a couple of years to clear it all out. But each day it's getting a little bit better as we start moving down that road. Let me tell you a rather dramatic success story that we saw up at the Weimar Institute. An individual had very badly blocked arteries in his heart. He had an angiogram done, and I went to his cardiologist, and you know, he was on nitroglycerin, all kinds of medicine, short of breath, severe chest pain, angina all the time. And this cardiologist says, you definitely need cardiac bypass surgery. And so we sent him over to the cardiac surgeon, and the cardiac surgeon reviewed his history, his physical. He reviewed all of the angiograms and stuff, and he said to him, you definitely need bypass surgery. But, he said, you are so bad and such high risk, most likely you will die on the operating table. You are too high of risk, you know. And he basically told him he was inoperable, there was no hope for him, and he basically told him he probably had maybe 6 months to live, although he could drop dead in a few minutes at any time. His heart was so bad. And he sent him home with really no hope at all. Well, he had a friend who had heard about the Weimar Institute. He says, why don't you check it out? Maybe they can help you. And he said, well, I guess it can't get any worse. Let me try it. So they called and made arrangements and went up there. And when he got there, they were going to take him from the car into the lodge. And he had trouble getting out of the car, terribly short of breath and angina and chest pain. He could barely make it with assistance, several people assist him, up, you know, just from his car on the curb up into the room to get to his room, and finally made it to his bed, and he could rest there. And of course, we thought we had made a terrible mistake in accepting him, because one of the things is we like people to be at least ambulatory, because part of the program is walk, walk, walk. And this guy was so bad he couldn't hardly move because he had such bad disease. But we started going with the program, and first day for his exercise. Now, right out in front of the lodge there is a flagpole, and around this flagpole there's a big circular planter. And so the assistant walked with him and was carrying a chair. And they started to walk around this circle and they got about a quarter of the way around, and he was having too much chest pain. He set the chair, let him sit down and rest till he caught his breath and the pain subsided. Then they walked a little bit farther and rested again, and continued on in this way till they finally made it all the way around the circle and then made it back to his room again. And they did this several times during the day. And of course, they did the same thing to get from there to where the cafeteria was, where the food was. They would just go a little ways and sit in a chair, a little ways and sit in a chair. And in the cafeteria, he got whole plant foods whole, none of this bad fat, no animal products, everything was whole in there. And as it progressed, gradually in a few days, he was actually improved enough that he could make it entirely around the circle before he had to rest. And to make a long story shorter, after a few days, he could actually go several times around. And by the end of 3 weeks, he was actually able to walk on the trail. There's a little half-mile loop around where the campus right there in the lodge is that people often walk on. He was actually able to walk all the way around that loop without chest pain or needing to take nitroglycerin because he was already getting that much improvement in 3 weeks. He stayed up there another 3 weeks for a total of 6 weeks, and during that next 3 weeks he continued to improve further, and he started hiking some of the trails in the woods, and he was hiking 3 miles a day by the time he finished 6 weeks there and wasn't using any nitroglycerin for chest pain. He felt great. I mean, he felt more energy than he had ever felt. Everything was working so much better. Well, what makes this story sort of dramatic is he went home and he took up a new hobby. He was so excited. Guess what his hobby he decided to take up? Mountain climbing. And he started hiking mountain trails and doing these, and pretty soon we heard he had done Mount Whitney. And then, later he went and started doing Pikes Peak and all of these big mountain things, and the next year he was up in Alaska doing Mount McKinley. He was doing all kinds of these huge big things. And then a couple of years, we got some postcards from him. He had gone to Nepal and was over in the Himalayas. He didn't do Mount Everest, but he did some of those other big trekking climbs up on those really high mountains there in Nepal. And he continued to do that. Of course, he said, hey, I'm not going up and signing up to go on this unless you can assure my diet, because I'm on this special diet. By the way, he had an angiogram a few years, after being at Weimar. All those arteries that needed to be bypassed, they were all wide open. You see, drugs are not the answer. And particularly in this case right here, where would cholesterol drugs have gotten him? You need to actually clean out what's in there. And the way to clean it out is on a whole plant food diet. Package it up in the HDL, take it over to the liver, get it out of there, and open those arteries up. Heart attack, strokes, arteriosclerosis, the #1 cause of death in the United States today is from heart attacks and strokes. It's this disease process we're talking about here. But it is a very, very reversible disease. You don't have to be stuck with it. And the good news is it really clears up very, very quickly. Just simply going out and walking and sticking very strictly to the whole plant food diet. God designed us to live this way. He designed the food we were supposed to eat. He meant for us to live on the plant foods. What did he tell Adam and Eve? Here, I've given you every tree and seed and bush here. This is your food. If we come back and eat the way God intended us to eat and walk and use our bodies, drink water, the body heals itself. So you don't have to have these diseases.